don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Luke Metzger. I'm the Executive Director of Environment Texas. We're a nonprofit advocate for clean air and water, parks and wildlife, and a livable climate. And we're here today to talk about solutions to Texas's trash and specifically plastic trash problem. And we've got a really great lineup of speakers today to talk about various pieces of all this. I'm just going to go through and introduce all of our panelists real quickly. So we have, so first off, I'll be giving some brief overview remarks. And then we'll be turn it over to Mike Garver, who is a longtime Houston resident, entrepreneur, and founder of Texans for Clean Water. Mike has been a tireless advocate for clean and litter-free open spaces and waterways, especially the Buffalo Bayou in Houston, which has earned him the nickname the Trash Man of Buffalo Bayou. And he founded Texans for Clean Water in 2013 with the goal of engaging business and industry to share in the responsibility of tackling waterway litter, because he believes both the economy and the environment benefit from clean, trash-free waterways. Then we will have Maya Corbett speak. She directs grant funding to mission purpose organizations for the Garver Black Hilliard Family Foundation, focusing on litter prevention through research and policy. And in her capacity as president of Texans for Clean Water, Maya advocates for data-driven public policy solutions to waterborne litter. She also serves on the boards of directors for the National Stewardship Action Council and the Container Recycling Institute. Then we have Emily Friedman, an experienced sustainability leader and market editor driven by a passion for people and the planet. In her current role, she exposes market trends and provides thought leadership for the North American recycled plastics industry. Prior to ISIS, Emily was a corrosion expert and reliability engineer at Exxon, serving both refining and petrochemical operations. She holds a degree in materials science and engineering from Virginia Tech and lives in Houston. Then we've got Dr. Veena Singla, an adjunct assistant professor in environmental health sciences at Columbia University and a fellow with Halt the Harm Network. Her research investigates how toxic chemicals and pollution related to systems of materials use, production, and disposal, including plastics, threaten the health of impacted communities. She serves on the US EPA's Children's Health Protection Advisory Committee and the NIH National Toxicology Program Board of Scientific Counselors. And then finally, we'll have Jen Hedaya bring us home. She is the executive director of Air Alliance Houston, which works to reduce the public health impacts from air pollution through research, education, advocacy. Prior to joining Air Alliance Houston, she worked in leadership roles at various state and county health departments and nonprofit organizations, and she studied at both Yale and Columbia universities. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Go back to my slides, if I can find them. Apologies. Okay. Okay, so Texas produces too much waste. In 2022, Texas disposed of 39.73 million tons of municipal solid waste at landfills, which is about 4.9 pounds per person per day. It's even worse in Houston, where about 10 pounds of trash per person per day, or twice the state and national average, are disposed. And this staggering amount of waste contributes to significant environmental problems, including methane emissions from landfills. According to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, Texas landfills contribute the CO2 equivalent of 12.7 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year. And landfills also have the potential to leach hazardous materials into groundwater and are often a smelly and noisy nuisance for the people who live nearby. And unfortunately, a lot of the waste that we generate here in Texas don't even make it to the landfills, but instead are littered onto our beaches, bayous, and beyond. According to National Geographic, 73% of beach litter worldwide is made out of plastic. And a big part of the problem is that we aren't doing a great job at reducing, reusing, and recycling. We only recycle about 23% of our waste in Texas, 12 points below the national average. And some cities are even worse than the statewide average in Texas. For example, in Houston, has a recycling rate of only about 19%. And then a new buzz phrase floating around that may sound like a solution to the challenges of recycling plastics, chemical recycling, but as Dr. Singla will walk through, there's a lot of concerns about the efficacy of this technology, as well as just some of the public health and environmental concerns. However, we have a lot of good opportunities to expand our use and our waste reduction strategies and recycling, et cetera. And we're starting to see some progress on that front. Major corporations, including Amazon, have committed to reduce their plastic use. Here's an example of a package Amazon sent. Instead of using those plastic air pillows, using recycled paper to ship products. But we're also seeing, commitments from companies from Coca-Cola to Cisco, in Houston, committing to reduce their waste. We also have great examples of reuse and reusable food containers. In Galveston, the Turtle Island Restoration Network and Perpetual and other partners are developing a pilot program for local restaurants to encourage people to take reusable beverage containers and food containers and bring them back to help reduce the use of disposable plastic waste. We're also seeing a growing movement to allow people to repair their own stuff. Unfortunately, many of our products these days, the manufacturers don't make it easy for people to get the tools or the diagnostic equipment or the instructions to fix their own products. And so as a result, people are forced to just throw them away. And so a number of states are now taking action to make sure that people do have the right to repair. And we're expecting legislation in the coming session in Texas to do the same. And then finally, we have the good old container deposit laws that have been, some of the nation's most successful recycling laws, available in many states. And as Mike and Maya will discuss, we see a lot of opportunity to extend that both here in Texas and, potentially nationally. So let me stop there, and I will now turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thank you, Luke. As I think you mentioned, I'm chairman of Texans for Clean Water, and we've been working to eliminate or reduce plastic and other floatables that are in the waterways of Texas, and in particular, Houston. All of our streams in Houston carry a lot of floatables, bottles, and plastic, aluminum, and glass. Buffalo Bayou is our largest stream, and that's a picture out near the Federal Road in front of one of our chemical plants. But you can see the floatables there. There's a lot of styrofoam, but there's also a lot of bottles and containers. That's Port of Houston. We call it Dock 8, and it's kind of famous for gathering up to an acre or so of floatables after every rain. While we pick these things up, every time it rains, we get a new batch of them. So Buffalo Bayou is our largest stream, flows straight through the middle of Houston. And we have 6 other streams, 6 other bayous people ask frequently, why do people throw all that stuff in Buffalo Bayou? And the facts are, they don't throw it in Buffalo Bayou. They throw it out of their car window, and it winds up as litter on our streets. The next heavy rain picks it up and take it right into our bayous, which terminate one way or another in the Port of Houston. The boat on the right-hand side there is our vacuum boat, and you can see the big ship in the back there. But we have numerous places in the Port of Houston that have 1 or more acres of floating trash. So, as I said, I think people wonder why they throw this stuff in Buffalo Bayou. They don't throw it into Buffalo Bayou. It gets there by way of the streets and the rain through our storm sewer system. Captain Robbie Robinson is in charge of the waterfront activities for Buffalo Bayou Partnership. One of his duties is supervising the operation of 3 boats that are picking up floatables on a full-time basis. They're picking the floatables up from 9 different containment booms and from various slowdown spots at the Port of Houston. Our largest tool is the 40-foot barge that you see on the right-hand side. That barge is equipped with a 20 cubic yard roll-off container and is operated by Captain David Rivers, also known as Bio Dave. This boat has an 80 horsepower vacuum cleaner, 16-inch vacuum hose. Your vacuum hose at home is about 2 inches in diameter. This one's 16 inches in diameter. Like I say, has 80 horsepower and does a super job of picking up floatables. Has a boom that allows it to move from left to right. Our other boats are smaller and pick up floatables using dip nets, which is a much slower process, but it gets into nooks and crannies that you couldn't get to with the big boat. A large amount of the floatables in Texas are drink containers that would not be there if we had a 10-cent deposit refund as it exists in other states. I think the lead-in said the only state with a 10-cent deposit was Michigan, but I understand Oregon has now bumped theirs up to 10 cents also. And we need 10 cents, but even for a nickel, people will pick this thing up. We have, I have pictures of people going through our various street side trash containers to get aluminum, and aluminum cans are worth 2 cents each. So I know for sure for 10 cents, they will return these deposits. Recovering floatables is very, very expensive. The vacuum boat itself costs $300,000. We do get some financial help, thankfully, from the Port of Houston and from Shell Oil. According to a study done by Keep America Beautiful, Texas is one of the most littered states in the United States. Litter makes floatables. The litter hits the streets, and the stormwater picks it up, puts it in the stream. After many years of driving to Austin advocating for deposit refund, and now going to Washington, D.C., advocating advocating for deposit refund. We do have some hope for deposit refund in Texas, and hopefully for the nation. The plastic that we don't pick up sooner or later becomes microplastics that we read about, that is now found in the fish that swim in the ocean, and it's found in human beings after we eat those fish. So this is something really important. We don't know how bad that is for people, but we definitely need to get a handle on it. And in our opinion, deposit refund is the way to go. And that's kind of it for my presentation. And I'll step back and ask Maya to focus on how legislations may occur.
Well, thank you, Mike. I sure appreciate that. And I hope everybody can hear me out there. Some great questions coming in on the chat. So we'll try and go through those as those are, as we like to say, we like to show dirty pictures up front, just so people orient themselves that what we're talking about is more than just a nuisance. You know, some people, and I see in the chat there, you know, do people actually care? And someone else said they do, and it's true, people do. People often don't recognize the scope. And so when you see one or two pieces of litter on the side of the street or in a storm drain like this, you think, gosh, that is terrible. But the accumulation that occurs in waterways, as we just saw, and at the Buffalo Bayou Partnership tackle every day, it's about 500,000. One of the questions is how much the boat cost and how much of the ongoing operations. It's very expensive. And in fact, we will talk about how litter and illegal dumping, which is just a 5-pound weight limit to how much that is costly to communities, not only monetarily, but also in terms of public health. TxDOT just came out and admitted, so to speak, that litter exacerbates flooding, property values, obviously recreation and tourism, etc. But let's just talk about expense. Litter is expensive. There was a cost of litter study done by we at Texas for Clean Water helped to support this study. But this looked at direct receipts, not the kind of volunteer hours or the other kind of intrinsic value, but just the direct costs of picking up and throwing away other people's trash. And as you can see, it's very expensive. It's expensive in Houston, which is over $21 million a year. And, you know, as you know, in Houston, there's no solid waste fee. So all that money essentially comes out of taxes. And so that is coming literally from people's pockets. And it's not just a Houston problem. It's not just an urban problem. You see here, Laredo, Lufkin, places that you don't consider as urban hubs are finding this to be a real challenge. Dallas later repeated our methodology. So we have about $20 million a year in community spending on this. So it's expensive. As Mike mentioned, and so did Luke earlier, deposit return systems work. We supported a Keep America Beautiful study in 2020 that surveyed the nation and counted how many pieces of litter are on the ground at any given time for any given person. And it's about 152 pieces of litter. And that's a lot. It's less, as someone mentioned earlier, what happened, American culture is in decline, maybe, but actually the litter rate has gone down. So even though 152 pieces of litter per person is still astronomically high, we have made progress. And deposit return systems is one way to motivate people who may not do it out of their own, altruism or feeling of the right thing to do. Putting a monetary incentive on something does reach another segment of the population that is possibly more of the what's in it for me? What is the monetary incentive? And of course, the monetary incentive for one person might not be as high as it is for someone else. So having that value adds a whole population of people who would be interested in that might not see that as valuable ahead of time, without a financial incentive. But in the end, the data is pretty clear that there's 50% less litter on roadways for materials that are covered under a deposit system, and 30% less overall litter. And that these programs are significantly supported by both states that have them and states that don't. And just a quick look at some more data. The recycling rates in the states that do have deposit systems are significantly higher than here in Texas, and frankly, the other 40 states that don't in aggregate. And there are absolute correlations there. As Luke mentioned in the earlier intro, we throw out a lot of stuff. Well, this stuff at least wasn't thrown out. And putting that incentive on that material also makes it so that it isn't thrown out the car window, which is again what we see. So quick facts here, which is that Texas is the largest state with the lowest recycling rate. And how does that impact us? Well, not only, as Luke mentioned, does a lot of this material go into landfills, which are necessary, but no one wants to permit a new landfill. They have all sorts of other issues, as Luke mentioned. But we're missing out on an enormous economic driver. As you see in the bottom, the scrap value of the material that we're, either putting in a hole in the ground or waterway is close to 350 million per year. That's significant. So there's an economic driver here that we're really trying to lean into when it comes to policy, and we've seen real traction there. So just quickly, Luke mentioned some other policy mechanisms. One that we're seeing proliferate is extended producer responsibility. The states in the darker blue have recently passed extended producer responsibility. And this is a concept by which, pretty simply, those that produce, who make a material, and it includes making the decisions on how that material is made, what substrate is made from, what's the packaging around that material, those decision makers have to take responsibility, sometimes in design, sometimes in funding. But the concept is that there has to be a throughput from the inception of a product through its final disposition. And the lighter blue are all the states, and there's many more actually, who are considering extended producer responsibility. And I just want to give, this is kind of a big, lots of stuff going on here, but just wanted to give a quick orientation of how extended producer responsibility works with refunds. Extended producer responsibility incentivizes the system writ large. So producers have to take into account packaging design, labeling, etc., including reuse, which was mentioned earlier, as a great tool. But you have to think about the packaging design and the whole system of circularity to make that work. So same with recycling, same with right to repair, etc. All those things can be part of an extended producer responsibility system. The recycling refund, that incentivizes the public. This is where the public has issuance, so to speak, to decide what to do with that container. And that financial incentive is really essential, as we've seen in not only other states, but other nations around the world, to getting that material back into a circular system. There are other mechanisms that people have tried. I think I have here policy intention, because the data has not necessarily shown that some of these other efforts have worked necessarily. Tennessee put in a litter tax. Louisiana is looking at litter courts. They've got a separate court system for litter. Here in Texas, we have a law that forces community service to pick up litter for those who are violated for littering. But in the end, we've seen other policy mechanisms just not be as successful as deposit return systems. At the federal level, there's quite a lot of action going on. Some would say a bit nibbling at the edges of, I won't go into all these. I know we're kind of short on time, Luke, but I will say that there is a lot of momentum happening, and it's a pendulum. That chemical recycling is a potential reality that's come from some of these other policy mechanisms, and so there is a push pull with the industry and the administration, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But that's it. I'll stop there, and I don't know if you want to hold questions to the end, Luke, but I'm happy to answer some now.
Yeah, let's hold questions to the end. And so now we'll turn it over to Emily. Once we collect more of the waste via a container deposit or other mechanism, we need to be able to recycle it. And there are lots of opportunities to expand kind of what we're currently doing. And Emily can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's saying the host isn't allowing multiple presenter sharing for this webinar.
Oh, let me make you a co-host real quick.
Sorry.
Okay, should work now.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right, let me know when you guys can see my screen. We good?
Good.
Great. Okay. Yep. So thank you for introducing me, Luke. My name is Emily Friedman. I'm a senior market editor for a company called ICIS. If you knew us in the past, we were ISIS, but we've rebranded, thankfully. What we do, if you're not familiar with our company, we're a global provider of market intelligence. So we're looking at pricing, we're looking at supply and demand analytics, and that's mostly centered on the petrochemical industry, but it includes where I sit down in the recycled plastic space. So I'm looking at recycled plastic pricing and supply and demand day in, day out in this role. So I'm going to bring to the table today some of the data that we have as a company around mechanical recycling, as well as a discussion around the market drivers for the recycled plastics industry. Because I think a lot of people forget that the recycled plastic industry has to have economic drivers, just like any other market. I know it's good for the planet and we want it to just happen, but ultimately it doesn't just happen unless there's that economic incentive. So just to get started, looking at the infrastructure in relation to US recycled plastics and mechanical recycling. I just want to level set really quick because I know we talk about recycled plastic a lot, but maybe you aren't as familiar with what that actually looks like. So I'm going to walk us through the process of mechanical recycling so you're a little bit more familiar. So first off, let's start where's the feedstock coming from? One source of recycled plastic feedstock is you as a consumer putting that bottle in your recycling bin at the end of your driveway if you have curbside recycling as like a residential citizen, or maybe that means you're going to a drop-off center. We have several depositories here in Houston that I even got to use back when I was living in an apartment, or maybe you've returned that bottle if you live in a bottle bill state, you've returned it to that retail store to get your 10 or 5 cents back. So that material, in the most case, if we're looking at curbside material, is all mixed together with recycled plastics, recycled paper, recycled metals, and cans. When it gets to the first facility, we call it a material recovery facility. These are companies like Waste Management, Republic Services, Casella. You might be familiar with some of these. They'll sort the material into its separate recyclable streams. So the cardboard will go one direction, the metal will go another direction, and then the plastic is actually sorted into a few different categories. So your bottled beverages, your water and your soda, that'll go into one stream. Your milk jugs, that'll go into a separate stream. Your detergent containers or shampoo bottles, that'll go in one direction. And then your yogurt cups and your butter tubs or your sour cream tubs, that'll go in another direction. Once those different plastic types are sorted, they're crunched into what we call a bale. And this is really the first commodity in this market. Think of like a hay bale, but it's plastic. So I have a picture of it right here. That bale is then sold to the recycler, who will break up the bale, do a little bit of cleaning, they'll wash the material, and then they'll grind it up to what we call flake. This is an intermediate step for recycled plastics. That flake is sometimes cleaned up further, and then it's more or less heated up and extruded. If you think like Play-Doh, when you're cranking that through that like spaghetti maker, basically, same idea. Plastic is heated up, it's cranked through the spaghetti maker, and then as it comes out of the spaghetti maker, it's cut into these little what we call pellets. This pellet form is pretty much the same as the physical form of virgin plastic after it's been produced. So from the pellet form, the recycled plastic or the virgin plastic can be formed into different end-of-life products, whether that's another bottle, whether that's, say, polyester. So polyester is a fiber, but it's actually made from plastic, or maybe it's another milk jug, for example. So that's just a little bit of info on what mechanical recycling actually looks like. Now getting into some of the really cool data that we have here at ICIS. So we more or less have a global database of all mechanical recyclers as well as all chemical recyclers. Here we're looking at just mechanical capacities. So I'm comparing Europe and the US, or I guess broadly North America, because I think a lot of times we have this perception that Europe is just so much more advanced than the US in terms of recycled plastics or some of these environmental themes. But what I want to bring to the table is that in the US, we actually have a very large mechanical recycling infrastructure already set. So though we might not have as many facilities as Europe, our facilities, and we have a little over 300, tend to be larger in scale. The one thing I will note, a key difference between the Europe region and North America is in Europe, it's really focused mostly on what we call post-consumer recycled plastic, which means the feedstock source came from a place where it already met its intended use. So you drank the bottle or you drank the beverage and you return the bottle, or you use shrink wrap to keep the plastic pieces together, they reach the destination, you recycle the shrink wrap. Whereas in the US, we have a lot of post-consumer recycling, but we also have a very significant amount of post-industrial or sometimes called pre-consumer recycling infrastructure. So that's maybe one of the key differences, and something to keep in mind is that not all recycled plastic or recycled content is the same. Sometimes recycled content, if it just says on a package, uses 50% recycled content, that could mean that it's coming from a post-consumer source, which is what we definitely want to encourage, or it could be coming from a post-industrial source, which maybe is not as sought after as post-consumer, but at least is still keeping that material out of like a waste stream, for example. So now switching gears, talking a little bit about markets. So you have a picture of what we can do, but how can you and I as individuals or even as collective really help develop this industry? So the first thing I want to bring to your attention is that, you got to start at the beginning, and that's with feedstock. And unfortunately, the US recycled plastics market is very limited in some cases by the availability of feedstock. So this is just a graph right here of US recycling rates when it comes to specific types of recycled plastic. So either PET bottles or HDPE bottles. PET bottles are going to be your water bottles, your soda bottles. HDPE bottles, those are going to be your milk jugs, your detergents, your shampoos. The PET, HDPE are just types of plastic. So at the end of the day, we really need each one of us as individuals to do our part, even if it's not necessarily convenient, in order to boost supply into this industry. Sometimes that means actively recycling. Sometimes that means just being a messenger and sharing the word. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think sometimes people have the notion that recycling is fake, and there's some reasons behind that, but I can assure you there is a very healthy and strong market for particular types of recycled plastic, like bottles and milk jugs and detergent bottles that we all touch every single week. So the first step to helping improve this industry, of course, comes from making sure we have enough supply into the industry so that it can grow. On the flip side of that, in order to support the industry, we want to grow demand. So Mai had already talked through some really great legislative topics around ways we can increase recycled plastic and the increased collection of recycled plastic. One thing I want to talk about is a legislative driver to increasing recycled plastic content demand. So in 5 states across the US, they've passed laws that require a certain amount of recycled plastic within different types of material. So that's maybe say 15% of a water bottle has to be made from recycled plastic, for example. The graph that's moving, that's just showing how these recycled content goals will grow over time. So usually it starts low, maybe 10, maybe 15% recycled content, and then over a period of several years, you're supposed to be growing that percentage. So this is more or less mandating that companies use recycled content, which again drives demand for the market and encourages people to invest. Another demand driver would be the voluntary goals of brand companies. So think the Coca-Colas, the Unilevers, the P&Gs of the world. If they're not being required to use recycled content, in many cases, they've volunteered and said, we're going to be using recycled content because we know it's good for the planet and because we know our consumers want it. The unfortunate part is in many cases, these goals were very ambitious. And so we're finding that companies maybe are struggling to meet those initial goals, though they've made progress, which is good, on using more and more recycled content, particularly plastic recycled content. Again, what you can do as a consumer is use your purchasing power to show that you care and you want to see recycled content in the products that you're buying. Because at the end of the day, that is what these brand companies are looking for, is, are consumers willing to pay for a green premium? And that leads me to my final topic, which is pricing. There is a premium that's often associated with recycled plastic and recycled content. This mainly stems from the fact that there, in some cases, is not enough supply of a specific grade of recycled content that is really sought after. So for example, sometimes people really want recycled plastic that's clear. Well, and a lot of times recycled plastic gets mixed up together and then the color kind of gets mixed and then maybe it turns to black at the end of the day, and that's less attractive. So for those very high value recycled resins that are maybe clear and they're post-consumer, there is a substantial premium. That's what you can see here on the left-hand side, that graph. The dark green is the recycled plastic price. The light green is the virgin plastic price. But for some of those grades that are maybe not as sought after, so maybe it's post-industrial recycled plastic, or maybe again it's mixed colored or black, the recycled plastic price is actually lower than the virgin counterpart. So again, recycling in dark green and then virgin in light green. This is really my bread and butter. So if you have any questions related to recycled plastics markets, whether it be pricing, supply and demand, I'm more than happy to answer them today. Or you can scan this QR code and you'll have access more or less to our whole team. I sit on a global team. So if your interests lie in recycling markets in other regions, we can definitely help you out there as well. Okay, that's all for me for now.
Terrific. Thanks, Emily. Let's leave your QR code up there for a few more seconds in case anybody wants to scan that. And then we are going to turn it over to Dr. Singla to share some of the concerns associated with chemical recycling.
Thank you so much, Luke, and really appreciate Environment Texas organizing this important webinar. I'm just going to share my slides here. So again, I'm Veena Singla, an adjunct assistant professor at the Columbia Mailman University School of Public Health. And I'm very pleased to be speaking on this webinar today about my beautiful home state of Texas. I was born and raised in Dallas. So I wanted to start off just saying this problem can seem very overwhelming. It is a huge problem, but we have a lot of solutions in hand today. You know, we lived very recently with far less plastic than we use today. We know how to do this. We can do it again. You know, in my elementary and high school cafeterias, there was not one single disposable plastic product. So there's just a very simple example of how we know what systems we need and can use to use far less plastic. But one piece that is not a part of this solution is the so-called chemical recycling of plastic. And I'm going to tell you why today and touch on some of the major environmental and health concerns with these technologies. Okay, so as we just heard, the plastic that's recycled today, it's overwhelmingly done with mechanical recycling. So you just heard about that process. Then let's turn to chemical recycling. And I think the first part of the confusion with chemical recycling is that there's so many different names that are being thrown around for these sets of technologies: advanced recycling, molecular recycling, chemical recycling, plastics renewal, and the plastics industry is constantly kind of rebranding and coming up with new names. The second part that's a bit confusing is that advanced recycling or chemical recycling are these umbrella terms that actually refer to a whole set of different technologies. Here's some of the names of these processes: pyrolysis and gasification, depolymerization, solvolysis. So when someone says chemical recycling, they could be referring to any one of these different processes. And pyrolysis and gasification in particular are known as thermal conversion processes. They use high heat and pressure, and they're classified as incineration under the Clean Air Act. So what does chemical recycling actually do? What does this process look like? So here's a diagram. First, you can see that it has many more steps than mechanical recycling. And there's, as I mentioned, there's different processes to take the plastic waste and break it down. But what these processes all have in common is that they're using high heat, or high pressure, or chemicals, or some combination of all of these things, heat, pressure, chemicals, to accomplish this breaking down of the plastic. Next, you can see that there's these different possible pathways of what chemical recycling can produce. So on the top, that orange pathway, the broken down plastic is used as fuel, and that fuel gets burned. In the lower pathway, the broken down plastic produces chemical components that can be used to make other chemicals or other products, or used to make new plastic. So very importantly, that it's important to know that the majority of existing chemical recycling facilities are actually producing fuels that get burned. This is not recycling any plastic. It is not plastic recycling. Other concerns with these chemical recycling facilities is the harmful air pollution and hazardous waste that they produce, and the fact that they're overwhelmingly cited in environmental justice communities. So here in this table, what you're seeing is data from state air permits for 8 different chemical recycling facilities. And down the left-hand side is harmful air pollutants that they're allowed to emit. And across the top is the health hazards associated with these chemicals. So you can see that a number of them are carcinogens, they're cancer-causing chemicals, they're toxic to the reproductive system, they're toxic to the developing organism. These are health hazards that are particularly of concern for children's health. A number of these facilities also generate large quantities of hazardous waste. So here's an example of 3 facilities and the hazardous waste that they reported to EPA in 2021. You can see many hundreds of thousands of pounds altogether. And the Braven facility was also cited with a hazardous waste violation that presented imminent dangers to the surrounding communities. And where are these facilities cited? Again, they're in places that are disproportionately low income, or people of color, or both. Very often these communities are already overburdened with pollution and poor environmental quality, and the last thing they need is more air pollution and hazardous waste. And now when we look at mechanical recycling in comparison to chemical recycling, what we see is that mechanical recycling performs better on pretty much every metric you can think of, whether you're talking economic, environmental impact, resource consumption technically. So what we're going to look at here is this study that compared different recycling technologies and looked at their impacts in these different dimensions. So this these graphs are a little bit complicated. I'm going to take some time. It reminds me of those nice Smarty candy necklaces, those pretty colors. So in the orange, that's the economic dimensions, the blue, environmental, pink, resource, and yellow, technical. That gray dotted line kind of down the almost the middle of the graph, that's the impacts of producing virgin plastic. And this is for PET in particular, as we just heard, that's your like water bottles, soda bottles, those kinds of plastics. So on the very top, that's the mechanical recycling performance, and a higher score is better. So you can see mechanically recycling plastic, it's higher, it's a better score than virgin plastic, right? It's past that gray dotted line, and it's generally better than all these other types of chemical recycling that are below it: dissolution, enzymatic, glycolysis, methanolysis. So another thing I want to point out is that pyrolysis and gasification aren't even on this graph, because what this paper found is that those thermal conversion technologies are about 10 to 100 times worse than virgin plastic. So they'd be way down, like on the left-hand side of this graph. They're not even in this picture because they perform so poorly in comparison. Okay, so this first graph, we're just seeing where all those factors are given equal weighting in the analysis: economic, environmental, resource, and technical. What if we say, you know what, we don't care so much about the environmental impact or the resource consumption. We just want to know, like, how is it doing technically and economically? What you see is that mechanical recycling is still better than these chemical recycling technologies. And then what if we say, well, actually, we care the most about environment and resources, and mechanical recycling still has the highest score. So really, chemical recycling, overall, it's making fuels. It's not recycling any plastic. The majority of facilities, there's a lot of health and environmental concerns, especially for impacted communities, and mechanical recycling is just still performing better. So, you know, the plastics industry has been really promoting chemical recycling as this magical cure that's going to recycle all these hard to recycle plastics. And this ProPublica article did a really deep dive, good job looking at pyrolysis specifically. That's the most common chemical recycling technology, especially for fossil fuel companies. And what they found is that, you know, again, pyrolysis isn't actually recycling very much plastic, and there's some industry accounting games that they're using to make it look like it recycles more plastic than it actually physically does. I definitely recommend this ProPublica article that goes into far more detail. And we're seeing these technical and economic challenges come to fruition with these facilities. Here's some recent articles. Shell just came out and says it's not going to be able to meet its chemical recycling goals. They're really infeasible. Agilyx, the facility I mentioned on the earlier slide that had been producing hundreds of thousands of pounds of hazardous waste, shut down. Another facility that was producing so-called sustainable aviation fuel also shut down recently. Here's a lot more resources where you can read more about some of the points I've explained, as well as a lot more details on chemical recycling. And I'll drop these links in the chat so that everyone can access these articles. And thank you very much. And my email is there on the screen.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Dr. Sangla. Now to bring us home, we've got Jennifer Hedaya.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to extend my gratitude to all of the speakers here who are so expert in their fields. I had a little bit of technical difficulty, but I was able to hear most, if not the majority of the presentations, and I have learned so much from all of you today, so thank you. I also want to extend my thanks to Luke and to Environment Texas for organizing this webinar. Luke has been an incredible partner to me and to Air Alliance Houston for decades, not just on this topic, but on our common purpose of clean air and public health. Luke has invited me here today to provide a brief reflection on what you have heard so far on this webinar, with specifically a local perspective and what we're seeing and concerned about here in the Houston, Harris County area. I will be brief because I know there are some questions and we will go right into Q&A after I make my comments. As background, Air Alliance Houston is the longest running advocacy nonprofit in the Houston area solely focused on clean air. We have been doing this since the mid-1980s. And we do this through research, education, and advocacy on the major sources of air pollution in our region, which are industry and transportation. We're talking about industry primarily today. We became involved in the topic of plastic pollution beginning in roughly 2022, and primarily for one reason: the proposed build out of new chemical or advanced recycling facilities. And now I've learned from Dr. Singla, there's probably 10 other words I need to put in the quotations about what we're talking about, because it does seem to morph in the ways in which industry refers to it, especially as research is released about its efficacy using one term. It seems that they morph into using another term. But for my purposes, we're referring to it as chemical recycling. And this topic appeared on our radar screen in particular because of a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, that was executed shortly before 2022 between the city of Houston and a handful of local industry, including ExxonMobil, Cyclex, and LyondellBasell. The MOU established a new initiative called the Houston Recycling Collaboration. And this new initiative proposed to collect hard-to-recycle plastics at municipal waste management sites in Houston and to send those plastics first to a sorting facility and then ultimately to one of these companies' new chemical recycling plants. This alarmed us for the reasons you have heard today. We knew from studies of chemical recycling facilities in other states that the byproduct of this technology is carcinogens, and that the proposed new buildouts, now supported by the city's new initiative, would be in the same communities in Houston and Harris County that are already impacted with the air pollution byproducts of the current plastic production complex, namely our existing petrochemical facilities. These new facilities were proposed in environmental justice communities like Galena Park, like parts of Baytown, and like parts of Pasadena. Of course, we were concerned given our mission and given the amount of air pollution these communities were already exposed to. We were also concerned because of the data that were emerging about chemical recycling, showing a clear lack of financial viability and efficacy. We have seen even more of these data since 2022 as facilities are beginning to close their doors in other states because they're literally losing financing because the promises made are impossible to be attained. We've actually been collecting our own data on the city's new initiative. We've been geotagging the plastics that have been dropped off at the municipal recycling locations and tracking where they go. Right now, despite what Houstonians have been told, no plastics, as far as we can tell from the Houston Recycling Collaboration, have been recycled mechanically, chemically, or otherwise. We believe the city's efforts to reduce plastic pollution from our landfills, our homes, streets, parks, and waterways would be better served through many, if not all, of the options presented today, through policy change, through investments in mechanical recycling, and not by investing in unproven technology that is impacting environmental justice communities that will expose them to carcinogens on the way to financial disappointment. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention the latest local development in this area as well, the emergence of proposals for SAF facilities, or sustainable aviation fuel. So far, there is one such facility proposed here, once again in Galena Park, Texas. And you may be aware that studies of exposure to SAF in Mississippi have shown a 1 in 4 lifetime risk of cancer from being exposed to this process. Very concerning. Again, I am deeply grateful to the thought leaders you have heard from today who are identifying true solutions to our plastic crisis. I hope to see our city and county leaders embrace these solutions, and we are happy to support and help them along the way. One final comment, Air Alliance Houston runs the local coalition against chemical recycling, trying to slow and stop the build out of this technology here in our environmental justice communities. And if you would like to join that coalition, please put your email in the chat to me, and I will add you to our mailing list. Thank you again. And with that, Luke, do you want to take some questions from the Q&A?
Yes, that's great. If you want to go ahead and go through them.
So I mentioned that I had technical difficulties earlier. So when I had to leave and come back, I might have missed a couple of questions, but there were some in the chat earlier versus the Q&A function. So I want to go back to some of those as well, because it does look like some of the Q&A questions are being answered. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Vina. Thank you, Emily, for doing that. Back in the beginning of the webinar, there was a question about how can community members, groups, et cetera, support efforts for a plastic rebate program? That was one of the very first questions put in the chat. I think that came from Steve Stelzer, if memory serves. Would anybody like to take that one and share their thoughts for the group? Let me repeat it. How can we, the community, groups, et cetera, support efforts for a plastic rebate program?
I'll jump in if you don't mind. That's very similar to what we're trying to do. The rebate, now it's called recycling refunds. We're also throwing a bunch of names to the wall, but essentially a rebate is the concept of getting money back when you provide your material in a proper disposal collection system. And we, Texas for Clean Water, have been advocating for a rebate, refund, deposit system for many years in Texas. And we think we're closer now than ever before, quite frankly. And that has been a lot of push from some of the EPR states. So our Texas legislative session starts in January of 2025. We certainly hope that there and plan that there will be EPR and possibly recycling refunds on the table, and make your voices heard. And one of the questions in the chat was, can Houston do this on its own? Unfortunately not. There's a specific statutes in the Texas Solid Waste Code. If you remember the whole plastic bag fiasco that the Texas Supreme Court resoundingly said couldn't be done at municipal level. So it's got to be a state answer. We hope there will be state legislation this session, and please keep an eye out and tell your legislators you support it. You're muted.
I clicked it twice. Thank you so much, Maya. I'm going to jump to another question just in the interest of time to potentially allow another speaker to respond. This was also in the chat earlier in the session. What is a good channel for using our consumer voice to express our desire that manufacturers do better? I don't see much progress. The current channels are not impressive as far as delivering results. Any thoughts on how to encourage manufacturer change?
I guess this is maybe targeted more by manufacturer, meaning the brand company themselves. I think a lot of times, again, that is with your dollars, that is the best and most direct channel that you can have an impact. But I also think being an advocate among your friends, your peers, to be able to multiply that impact. There isn't necessarily like a forum or a place you can post to start a discussion around these types of ideas. But I think we'd all be surprised at the power of our networks. And maybe that means, for example, promoting a recycled content product that you found on LinkedIn or on Facebook that not only gives that brand that positive reinforcement of, yes, people actually care and they're buying it, but then also spreads the word again to your network that, hey, these are an option and maybe I should be looking for those kinds of products as well.
And then in our last minute, a great question from Mark in the chat. What is the ask of us as attendees to help move plastic reduction forward? Perhaps if every one of our speakers could give a very brief answer, your one takeaway from today's webinar for what someone can do to move this work forward. And I suppose we can just go in the order of the speakers themselves, trying to see where we started now to where we ended.
I think I started, so I can.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Luke.
Yeah, I think talking to your elected officials. I think whether at the local level, particularly in Houston, we're hoping people will contact the Houston City Council and encourage them to take more action on waste issues, including expanding mechanical recycling, looking very seriously at a pay-as-you-throw garbage fee, which we know also can reduce waste in addition to generating revenue that can be used to expand recycling services. And then at the state level, I think we've got legislative opportunities around a container deposit law, right to repair law, and then federally, some of the legislation that Maya kind of listed out, the Big Break Free from Plastics Act, et cetera. But contact your decision makers.
Okay, and I went next, but I'll be quick. Other thing is, don't be fooled. There's so much out there. Think deeply about marketing that's put your way. And yes, keep the conversation going. And not only with your legislators, but with your companies. Go to social media. Coca-Cola does not like to be put on blast, as the kids say, on social media. And neither does Arco Coca-Cola Southwest. Look closer to home. Coca-Cola, for example, is a national brand that has 1,000 heads, and it's the head closest to home that needs to hear the message. So let those fingers do the talking, as they say. That's it. Thanks, everybody.
My main takeaway would be, again, talking to those you're closest in network to. I'm a big proponent of being an advocate amongst your friends and family because, again, being in this role, I'm still shocked to this day how much convincing it takes for my own in-laws to get them to recycle, for example. So I'm a big proponent of starting with those closest to you and hoping that that can spread. I know that's more of a grassroots approach and we need all of the things that have been described, but please, if you believe in these things, talk to those who are around you because you'd be surprised who maybe doesn't, who's a close friend or a colleague or a family member.
And I'm going to reiterate some of the links and things I've been saying in the chat, that supporting the organizations that are doing this work and advocating for systems and policy changes is a huge way that we can build the movement and political will to make this transformation and make these changes. So support Environment Texas, support Air Alliance Houston, support all these organizations that are doing the work. Even your whatever you can give, however you can contribute, whether that's signing on to petitions, joining their member network, giving $5, these all make a huge difference. So please join the membership of an organization that speaks to you and help support the work that they're doing.
My last comment to finish quickly, Maya, I was inspired by what you said, which is to think deeply and critically. And as we do that, I would always ask, who stands to benefit from new technologies and policies, and who stands to be harmed? And let us never forget that, especially in the Houston-Harris County area, the industries that tend to benefit are in communities of color and lower income and both, who always persistently, consistently are harmed. And let us never forget that we have to stand side by side with the community members who are directly impacted by these decisions, and they have to be at the table when making those decisions that will affect their health. So I thank all of you for being here today. Luke, if you'd like to make some closing comments, I just appreciate everyone for joining us today. I think I registered, we had over 40 participants at top, and that's incredible on a Monday morning. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah, and just final thing. Yeah, I know we had some technical difficulties, so we will definitely send out the recording of this webinar and then some of the presentations, as long as the presenters are okay with that, to everyone who RSVP'd. So, and we'll stay in touch. So thank you all so much. We're over time, so I appreciate you joining us today.